Richard Linklater is serving up a fresh slice of comedy in his Netflix's latest Hitman. The movie's star is Glenn Powell, who plays Gary, your everyday professor in striped shirts and big glasses. But mind you, it's more than what meets the eye. Whenever he isn't discussing Kant and Descartes in his classroom, he moonlights as a hitman. Yes, you heard it right. While we have seen the John Wicks of the world, and Gary himself tells us that hitmen are pop culture fantasy, we're all still suckers for a good hitman story, aren't we? The charm of those gun-blazing assassins who can turn a toothpick into a deadly weapon is just too hard to resist. But Linklater's Hitman is here to shake things up. Before we go into explanation, we have a very small request. If you like our content, please support us by subscribing to our channel. This is a small click for you, but for us it means a lot. Thank you, and let's begin.
After some obligatory training, I was soon hiding cameras.
Who was Gary Johnson, hitman or a teacher? Our man of the hour, Glenn Powell, plays the very ordinary Gary Johnson, but don't let his plain Jane exterior fool you. There's a twist in the tale. Gary is not just your regular Joe college professor. Nope, he has a secret that is well guarded. Also, the character Gary, a brainchild of Powell and Linklater, is actually based on a real-life professor who moonlighted as a Fox hitman. Yep, that's right. In the movie by day, Gary is your typical professor who goes on and on eloquently about the psychology of identity and lives a rather quiet life with his two feline friends, id and ego. The most adventurous thing in his life as of yet. Yes, peeps, you're in for a ride. So where was I? Yes, Gary was the most adventurous when he was bird watching. But when the sun goes down, he swaps his tweed jacket for a tech headset and assists the New Orleans Police Department with their sting operations. But things take a drastic but funny turn when Gary steps out of the surveillance van and into the shoes of a hitman, all in the name of catching the bad guys. But here's what surprised everyone. Our boy was a natural at playing the killer. He sheds his mild-mannered professor persona and slips into the role of a confident, cunning hitman. Despite the skepticism of his colleague Jasper, who thought he was too soft for the job, Gary proved to be a master of disguise. Whether he was playing a Russian mobster, a John Wick doppelganger, or a rough-and-tumble redneck, he nailed it every time before heading home to his cats and a quiet dinner. But when Gary, under the guise of the smooth and irresistible hitman Ron, meets the beautiful Madison, who wants her abusive husband killed, something shifts in him. Ron wasn't just a mask anymore. Gary began to feel drawn to this self-assured, magnetic alter ego. In fact, he liked Ron more than Gary. So what now? What if Gary decides to hang up his old self in the closet and step into Ron's shoes for good? Can a caterpillar really become a butterfly? Is our identity just a fancy hat we wear? Can we switch our personas as easily as we change our socks? And is our personality just a show we put on for the world? Now, ain't that a thought to chew on? Is it based on the true story? Hitman begins with a prologue on the screen which reads, "What you're about to see is a somewhat true story." The real-life saga of Gary Johnson first saw the light of day in a 2001 Texas Monthly profile by Skip Hollandsworth. Gray Johnson was a psychology professor in his mid-50s who was mildly mannered. He fed his cats, tended to his plants, and was usually found in the depths of Carl Jung's works. But wait, there's more. Johnson would change into Mike Caine, Joe the Eagle, or Chris Buck, the hitman of every Houston resident's dreams. For those who haven't given a watch already, Johnson would sit in a diner and savor a slice of pie just like in the movie. A potential client might strike up a conversation about the pie and say, "That looks like a good pie." Johnson would casually agree with the statement, "All pie is good pie." The chat would then take a turn, the mark would confirm their intentions, money would exchange hands, and voila, the trap was set. The wrongdoer would be nabbed, all thanks to Johnson's convincing act. Gary Johnson, originally from Louisiana, was born in 1947 to a carpenter dad and a homemaker mom and lived a pretty normal life. After high school, he spent a year in Vietnam as a military policeman, a stint that sparked his interest in law enforcement. However, his journey to becoming a fake hitman was something not on Gary's cards. He first worked as a mole at the drug scene and usually went undercover. His charming and suave personality kept him under the radar and away from the prying eyes of suspicious dealers. In the 1970s, he returned home, worked as a sheriff's deputy, and later went undercover for the Port Arthur PD. But Gary's heart was set on understanding the human mind and how it worked. With a master's degree in psychology, he moved to Houston in 1981 with dreams of joining the University of Houston's doctoral program. But when that plan didn't work out exactly the way he wanted, he went on to become an investigator for the district attorney's office. This job eventually gave way to his unique career as a fake hitman. Definitely a life that was anything but ordinary. Like his on-screen character, the real-life Gary Johnson was a chameleon who adopted his persona to suit his client's needs. He obviously didn't have what it took to pull the trigger, but all he had to do was make people believe he could. Fake it till you make it. For the rich and savvy, he was all charm and sophistication. For the everyday folks, he was just one of the guys, with just the right mix of body language and words. He could draw out a confession from anyone desperate enough to want someone gone. In Hitman, we get a glimpse into Gary's real-world operations. Snitches would give the cops a heads up, and the would-be clients would get Gary's number. Then, like a master of disguise, he would show up in character, sometimes as suave Mike Caine, other times as rugged Chris Buck, and convince people he was the hitman that would make all their life's problems disappear. The movie really gives a backstage peek at some of Gary's real-life cases, like a man getting Gary's digits from a dancer to order a hit, or a woman planning to the T to stage her husband's murder as a suicide. The film even showed Gary's oddball encounters, like a teen trying to pay him in video games, or a bunch of ladies plotting to bump off their rich old husbands. What a fun life Gary must have lived, one can only wonder. Sadly, Gary Johnson checked out before he could see his life play out on the silver screen. Hitman wraps up with a touching tribute to him and celebrates his colorful life as a Vietnam War vet, college teacher, animal-loving Buddhist, and, in Linklater's words, the coolest cat around. As the credits roll, we see snapshots of the real Gary, the intriguing man behind the story. Is there any difference between true story and movie? In Netflix's Hitman, Gary's scholarly life gets a bit of tweaks. The real-life Gary was a community college educator in Houston who taught psychology and human sexuality. But in the movie, he was a full-time psychology professor at the University of New Orleans. By the time the credits roll, he seems to have cozied up to his professor persona, a dream that unfortunately remained unfulfilled for the actual Gary Johnson. In the real world, Gary took a shot at the University of Houston's doctoral program in 1981 but was rejected. This sent his life down a path he didn't see coming. Even though he didn't teach philosophy like his silver screen alter ego, Gary was a big fan of Carl Jung and Gandhi and often pondered the big whys and what-ifs of life. Gary's pretend play as a hitman in the Netflix movie began when he lent a hand to the New Orleans Police Department. He initially tinkered with their audio gear for sting operations and spent most of his time in the van. But his moment in the spotlight arrived when Jasper, an undercover cop, was benched for getting a bit too physical with some teenage suspects right before a sting. And no, Gary did not step in. Rather, with no choice, he was pushed to don the hitman persona. But he nailed it so well that the police decided to keep him on the roster for future stings. But that's not quite how it happened. The real-life Gary Johnson was no stranger to the boys in blue and had spent the better part of his life working with them. After his time as a military policeman in Vietnam, he wore the badge of a sheriff's deputy and even went undercover in drug busts. His surprise gig as a hitman came about when the police needed someone to play the part of a killer to coax a confession out of a lab technician who was looking to hire a hitman for her hubby. And unlike the movie's backdrop, Gary was pulling the strings in Houston, not New Orleans. In the movie, Gary is doing exceptionally well as a pretend hitman until he bumps into Madison, a woman trapped in a cycle of domestic violence, who is looking to hire him to off her nasty husband. At their first meeting, we see lots of flirtation across the table with Gary, who poses as the hitman Ron, but then on a whim, he nudged her to divorce her hubby and use the money she was offering for the kill and start afresh. This twist in the tale is a nod to a real chapter from Gary Johnson's life. As per a 2001 report in Texas Monthly, a young lady once approached a Starbucks barista in Montrose, Houston, and inquired if they knew a hitman to handle her abusive boyfriend. The barista pointed her towards Johnson. After digging into her situation and uncovering her boyfriend's habitual abuse, Johnson decided to ditch his usual acting playbook. Instead, he chose to lend her a helping hand. He referred her to social service agencies, and a therapist even got her a spot in a women's shelter to help her break free from the cycle of abuse. That was one time our hitman was all mushy and soft. The damsel in distress and Gary's sweetheart in the movie, Madison Masters, is pure Hollywood make-believe. The real Gary led a different life off-screen. He was on good terms with his ex-wife, who painted him as a bit of a loner, something that stuck with him all his life. He walked down the aisle thrice, but none of his marriages were successful. And unlike his movie persona, Gary never mixed business with pleasure or had any murderous escapades, if you know what I mean. The movie really goes to town with Johnson's tale in its jaw-dropping finale. But don't worry, my lips are sealed. You will have to watch it to unravel the surprise. What happened to him after the movie? Racking up more than 60 collars, Gary Johnson was the creme de la creme of his field, the Laurence Olivier, if you will. A former supervisor told Texas Monthly, calling Johnson the ultimate chameleon, a great performer who could make any situations in favor even if they weren't. He was cool as one can be, never flustered over his words, and could sell ice to Eskimos. He had both the high and rich and the down and out eating out of his hand. He was indeed the real deal, but all good things must come to an end, and his extraordinary ride wrapped up in 2022. Marvelous verdict. Netflix's Hitman gets one thing spot on about Gary Johnson, and that he was the slickest, most out-of-left-field pretend hitman Houston ever saw. He turned the art of undercover work into a work of art and added a touch of his own. With his chill vibes and unexpected layers, Gary was the king of disguise, and while we're wrapping this up, here's a piece of wisdom. If you ever find yourself in a diner and see a loner at the counter with a piece of pie, run. Oddly, he is not there just with a sweet treat, but ready to hook, line, and sinker you. If you liked our content, don't forget to leave a like and subscribe to us if you haven't already. Have a good one and be safe. Thanks, everyone.